Hello, everyone. My name is Justina. I work at Rasa as a head of developer relations, and I am stoked to be on L3-AI conference today, and I hope that you are all having a great time so far. And today I'm really excited about our panel today that we will be discussing about deployment of the assistants and more specifically focusing on connectors. And I'm very happy to welcome two very interesting, exciting panelists to join the discussion with me today. We have Lizzie, developer evangelist at Twilio, and Rob, who is working on partnerships at Google. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today. So before we start our discussion, I would like to set the scene a little bit and help attendees to understand a little bit more what kind of things we will be discussing. So throughout this conference, you heard quite a few talks about the best practices of developing AI assistants, focusing on different challenges when it comes to building NLU models or dialogue management or deploying your assistants in production. And today in this panel, I would like to focus a little bit more on this step during the deployment stage of your assistant, when you have to choose what communication channel your assistant should use when interacting with the users. And well, if you ask me, I would say that this step is as important as just actually developing a good AI assistant, because at least in my opinion and based on my experience in developing AI assistants, making sure that your assistant is easy to use and easy to find is a big part of user experience. So I think this decision of which connector, which channel to use for your assistant shouldn't be taken lightly. So in this panel, we will be discussing lots of different aspects about this topic. So we will talk a little bit about overall things that we see, how people communicate with AI assistants and businesses, and then we will discuss different aspects of what kind of things developers should keep in mind when deciding what connector, what communication channel to pick for their assistant. So I would like to start our discussion with a little introduction from our panelists. So Lizzie, maybe I'll start with you. I really would like to learn a little bit more about what kind of things you're working on at Twilio as developer evangelist. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, Twilio recently, we have a new product called Autopilot, which is a bot building platform that lets you build a bot once and deploy it across channels. And when that came out of beta last year, sorry, I was like hesitating on the time because like time is a social construct and I forget when things have happened. And I built a lot of blog content and I created a lot of chatbots for that product. So I've started delving into chatbots, automated assistants, voice bots, and I've also recently begun using TensorFlow. So trying to, I guess, branch out into general machine learning, but still a lot of chatbots and helping our customers build their best bots.
Nice, really interesting. Like as a developer advocate myself, I can definitely relate to the things that you're working on, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to learn more about these kind of things and your things that you have learned by working on chatbots as well. Awesome. And Rob, I know that you're working on partnerships at Google, so maybe you can tell us a little bit more as well, like what kind of things you're focusing on.
Yeah, great. And thanks again for having me. So I work in a sort of business development partnerships role at Google, specifically on our business communications products. And so there really our mandate is to try and open up communication channels between business and consumers. So how do we help businesses engage their customers, and how do we help consumers reach out and engage businesses that they're interested in? So a bunch of products, but really focused on messaging at the moment. You know, we think there's a lot of opportunity there. So really sort of trying to open up messaging channels sort of asynchronously between businesses and consumers. So we are later this month, we're launching a product called Business Messages, which is driven from search. So you search for a business on many of Google's surfaces, and then we can kind of intercept that search, put a message button there, and let the user reach out and engage the business with in an asynchronous sort of messaging sort of mode. So just like we're all used to doing through consumer-to-consumer messaging apps, SMS, WhatsApp, Facebook, WeChat, etc. We've all changed our consumer-to-consumer messaging behavior, but when it comes to interacting with businesses, often we have to pick up a phone, and we don't think that's necessarily great for the consumer or great for the business. So we're trying to open up asynchronous modes for that sort of more natural communication.
Wow, very interesting. And I think my first question that I have for our discussion today will probably be very related to exactly what you're working on, Rob. So I would like to start our conversation with just in general communication part. Myself just looking at how communication, human-to-human communication evolved over, I don't know, let's say past 10 years. It's really fascinating, like how things changed when people went from, using phone calls more to then moving to SMS messaging, and then using more of these apps and then using video calls and so on. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about like what kind of trends like this have you seen in how users communicate with businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I already started describing that, but I think we have a sort of philosophy of trying to meet consumers where they are. Like it's hard to change consumer behavior, so it's really like how can we tap into existing consumer behavior to help consumers, but at the same time it's like a marketplace. How do we also sort of help businesses? So phone calls are hard. Like it's if you have to call your ISP or your phone company or your bank or something during the day, like they're only maybe open during office hours, but you're working and your calendar is full, like finding, is it going to be a 10-minute call or a 30-minute call? That's tough as a consumer to find that sort of dedicated synchronous time to do something specific. And sometimes maybe we care enough, we're buying a house or something, and it's worth that effort, but if you just want to change your data plan, that's painful. So it's like there's lots of pain on the consumer side there, but also it's, those phone calls are really expensive to a business. So they're $5 to $10 to take an inbound call, and it's very kind of human driven. And so we see that sort of friction on both sides. We know messaging is natural consumer behavior. We all do it every day. The use of messaging apps continues to increase. So we sort of believe, which is why we started this product, and all the data says that it's working well, is giving people asynchronous mode, beyond using the message of bank or overdraft limit or something, and that would be fine. You could do that while you're multitasking, doing other things during the day, but you can't do that with voice. So it's we do believe that sort of asynchronous mode, and really sort of trying to follow user behavior rather than sort of guide it and sort of tap into what is natural, we think is the right path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Lizzie, what about you? Have you seen also something interesting about like communication between businesses and users that maybe you would like to talk about?
Yes, there's a lot more communication platforms or channels that users can be reached on. And I agree with Rob. I think now businesses are realizing that it's not one size fits all. Like a phone call is very like in the moment, versus like a text message or an email is more asynchronous. And customers are expecting to be able to reach a bot or someone 24/7 sometimes. So that's when you need a bot maybe like at like 2 a.m. And there's an interesting stat that I've seen on a few Folio Talk slides that 70% of customers today expect a self-service option in the form of bots or IVRs for handling questions or complaints. And something that we've also seen is that while people want bots, they also want some of the human aspect. So I hope that some companies don't forget that. Like there should be a hybrid option where if a bot gets stuck, hand it off to a human. Or if someone wants to speak to a human, they should be able to have that option as well.
Nice.
I think one of the other things that we see in our sort of user research is consumers want personalization. Like they don't expect to be treated as just a number. Like, you know, that they have their own, you know, I have my own relationship with my bank or with my phone company or whatever it might be, or the retailer, and I want to be treated, you know, I don't want to be sort of, you know, the communication to be relevant to me. And I think asynchronous, it allows that more easily. Like the conversation never dies. Like you can 2 in the morning send another question and then the business can respond. And because they don't have to respond instantly, they've got time to consider who you are and purchase history and other things. They can respond in a much more personalized way. So you can start to have much more of what feels like a one-to-one conversation with the business. Like it's not, you know, you don't have to go through the authentication, like what's my name, what's my last 4 of my social, what's my mother's. You don't have to go through that repeatedly, which just winds us up as consumers because we've done that before. Like, so asynchronous channels let that, you know, when it's done well, you can see businesses, you know, start to have what feels like a person-to-person relationship, which is interesting because it also sort of opens up branding opportunities. You have a lot more sort of warmth and empathy and loyalty to that business that treats you as an individual. So it's a channel that's very functional often, you know, but that sometimes leads to much sort of deeper emotional engagement with the business.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and that's actually a really good path to my next question, which was about like a little bit more about your perspective on AI assistants in this field overall. So in your opinion, what is the role of AI assistants in making the communication easier between users and businesses, and like how you see AI assistants transforming all this field already? Maybe Lizzie, you would like to take this one first?
Yeah, I think AI systems should make your life easier and make the company's lives easier as well, so they don't have to like have human agents. At the same time, some assistants can get stuck. Like, have you ever tried to order a pizza and like try to change your order, and like it can be hard to change your order and like go back and you have to start over. So I think that doesn't always make it easier. So the bot should be more able to adapt or like edit. And I think as bots get more commonplace and people build them more, they will get stuck less, so that will be fixed. But overall, they should be like a segue, like a communication channel, like not a means to an end between customer and business.
Rob, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in that I think if you look at user research, consumers say they don't really want AI. They won't engage with humans. Like there's a sort of sense that an AI or a bot sort of engagement is a sort of a replacement, and maybe a sort of dumbed down replacement for a human. And consumers say they would much rather speak to somebody than, or when I say speak, but engage with somebody than engage with a bot. But if you drill like a level below that, what they really want is speed. Like they want to get their questions answered quickly or the information they need quickly, and they want to be in control of that. And they feel like humans give them those two things. But I think if you actually look at user behavior, when the AI or when the automated system gives them that speed and control, they much prefer it to a human. Like I think a good example is, you know, none of us really order taxis anymore, but like, would you rather call a taxi company and speak to a dispatcher and explain where you want picking up and where you want dropping off, and then wait and hope that the taxi arrives? Or would you rather call an Uber or a Lyft and have that automated, and you can see the car on your phone and you're in total control and have visibility into all those backends? Like, we'd much prefer the latter because it's, you know, we get speed, we get control. Same as when you go to the supermarket, people typically prefer automated checkout because it's faster and they're in control. They don't have to engage with a human to do those things. So I think when you hit a certain level of completeness around that sort of speed and control, users really sort of jump into those things. And we see that today with our messaging product. Like if you can search for Walmart, you can see the message button on Google for Walmart, and you can ask it, hey, what time are senior hours. Hours have changed because of COVID-19, and I want to know what time I can go as a senior, and you get instant information now, versus if you call up, you have to wait for somebody to pick up the phone and tell you that, and that might take tens of minutes. Like it's a, so I think, just simple things that are automated and presented sort of easily to users, like consumers relish that and really like that. So it's really around understanding, what are users looking for, and how do you have those complete sort of user journeys that are easy for people to use and provide some sort of nourishing experience. Then I think it's, we see things being really successful. I think if there's AI there that doesn't understand users and you can't change the pizza order and that's frustrating, then people's emotions sort of boil up, and that, you do need to give them the fallback of talking to a human or engaging with a human in those situations. But we definitely see AI and automation sort of generally leading to much better user experiences when it's done correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then when I look at AI assistants and in general, like how people adopt them in their daily lives, I see that for some user groups, it is easier to find them and use them, while for others, for example, older people, it is something that they still have to, discover and learn. So from your experience in working in this field overall, do you see any challenges in making assistance more accessible to different kinds of people, and maybe you have some examples how picking the right connector, the right communication channel can help solve this issue and make it maybe easier for AI assistants to be accessible for everyone. Maybe Rob, you would like to take this.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think there are probably lots of good examples there of people that have built fabulous sort of AI experiences, and then but get very little usage. Like, how do you, like, we've probably all got some Alexa, Google Home, devices in our homes that we can talk to, even if it's just our mobile devices, that probably you can order a pizza and book an Uber and change your flight seats and do all sorts of things, but we just don't know about it. We don't think to do that yet. That's not sort of trained behavior for mass groups of consumers, and it's hard to discover those things. Like, you don't sort of have a visual sort of prompt that those things are available. So I think, from a Google perspective, we have a sort of interesting opportunity and maybe an obligation to help with those things, because we are a point of discovery. Like, often when somebody wants something, they come to Google. Like, you open up your browser and you just start typing something, and then you get some links and you get taken somewhere, or you open maps and you go somewhere. So we're often very early in user journeys where consumers want something, they want to go shopping, or they want to, they just have a question or a problem they're trying to solve. So our ability to intercept those user journeys at that sort of the start of the user journey, to say, hey, we think is exciting. So, from a messaging point, we're putting that into search, we're putting it into maps, or it's in search, it's in maps. We're looking at, we're helping businesses put those things on their own website. So you've got your own website, you want to put automation there. How do we give you assets so that you can trigger that and move people maybe out of a web mode into something that's messaging, or it's audio based? Like, so I think it's far easier and more impactful to try and sort of steer existing behavior. Like, so how do you tap into what's happening today and deflect it into what you built, rather than just building something and assuming people are going to come is always hard. Like, that's it's tough. So I think, Google, we have, some interesting sort of discovery surfaces, and we're really trying to sort of leverage those. But as Lizzie said, it's an omnichannel world. There are lots of other places, different channels that have different opportunities. And so from a brand or from a sort of builder perspective, you've got to think about who your customers are, what your user journeys are, what are the right places where you're going to be able to impact those things, so you hit the right demographics and the right types of use cases.
Mm-hmm. I think by definition of accessibility, of like meeting someone where they are and reaching someone, on one hand, they should know about the AI bot and assistant so they can use it. And on the other hand, with so many different channels that they can be reached on, you don't want to have your bot on one platform, and you don't want that to be the incorrect platform. Twilio Autopilot you can build a bot once and deploy it across Slack, SMS, voice, Facebook Messenger. If you're a company with a Facebook page, you might want Facebook Messenger. But other than that, I'm not really sure why. Like maybe if you're a company, like I know Under Armour is one example that I've used the Facebook Messenger bot. But if you're like an event, you probably don't want a Facebook Messenger bot. For Slack, if you have a Slack channel for like an event, or like your company Slack, then that's probably what you want. But if you're like doing a company, probably not Slack. So challenges faced, I think, for making assistance accessible include picking the right channel and making it known. You don't want to make your bot and have people think, but I'm not on Slack. I'm not on Facebook Messenger.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Lizzie, that you mentioned this kind of multi-channel deployment. And overall, myself looking at how developers build AI assistants, and just like when they come to this point where they have to decide on what platforms they would like to deploy their assistant, more and more often I hear this discussion: should this assistant be, as a text assistant, or maybe voice platform would be better to deploy this assistant on. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about this voice versus text topic. So Lizzie, do you see that text and voice communication channels, they kind of go hand in hand? And would you suggest developers to always consider having their assistant in both forms, voice and text? Or maybe you have some examples where making your assistant as on a voice platform works better than on a text, and vice versa?
That's a good question, because I think people use SMS and voice APIs are more popular ones that we're known for. So I think I see those chatbots more common. Voice is definitely, when I do a demo of a bot, voice is more impressive. People are like, wow, it recognizes what you're saying. And I can respond to that with natural language understanding. And I'm like, yes, but when you build a bot, at least for me, it's not about the platform, it's about the bot functionality, and then the platform secondary. And going back to text or voice, I think voice is much more in the moment. Like when a bot calls, you're gonna pick it up, and you can also walk around and look at other things. Versus text, that's more, you can wait until you're free. And when you're typing, probably for a text, like that's what you're doing. So I think that's more abrupt. I think we've seen voice more for banking, more financial bots. And I think something that we'll see more in the future are hybrids that include voice followed by SMS, or SMS followed by voice, where you get both. And then you'll have to consider keeping, what's it called? I guess remembering the context of the conversation, of the dialogue, and then continue it over on a different platform. So far, I think for text and voice, we haven't seen much difference in companies using them. Many just do both. I think that's an easy way of reaching someone on their phone. But voice, again, is more like abrupt, and text is like, I can leave that until like an hour or something.
Just to follow up on finance and banking, I'm just curious, maybe you can tell us a little bit more, like why this specific industry is and field is more, using voice communications more than others, maybe.
I'm a millennial. My people my age don't like talking on phones as much, but I think banking tends to be older generations. Like when I go to conferences and people, they tend to be older. And I think they're still used to talking on the phone. Not that we're not used to that. I don't mean to sound different, but just I don't like speaking on a phone as much, but I know others prefer it.
Nice. And Rob, maybe you have some insights as well about voice versus text? Are they hand in hand, or is there, I don't know, specific applications where you would see voice much better choice over text, for example?
Yeah. I'll confess, just because I work on a messaging product, I tend to have a sort of personal bias to messaging. But I think it's, again, you have to sort of boil it back to who your users are. That's a demographic, like are they 25 or 65? That probably tells you something about the channels they're going to prefer. I think some things are inherently visual. Like we have Levi's use our messaging product. So you can search for Levi's, you can hit the messaging button, and then you can pick a pair of jeans. Like, do you want men's jeans, women's jeans? Do you want slim, tapered, styles? Do you want this, the different types of denim? And those are presented visually. Like you look at pictures of people wearing jeans and say, no, I want those ones. And that's, it's a very visual product. You're buying jeans because you want to look a certain way. And doing that over voice would be really hard. Like, how do you describe a pair of jeans? So I think that lends itself. Or if let's say you want to change the seat on an airplane, like I don't want to talk to a human, I want to see a map of the plane and I want to pick the seat that I want. Like it's so, and doing that in audio would be really tough. But then I think things like, I just want to know my bank balance. Like audio is great. Like I can do that while I'm making dinner, I can talk to something and I can get my bank balance. Like I don't have to get my phone out and type and do those things that are maybe more cumbersome. So I think there are certain use cases that are, work in some versus the other. I think kind of use, like when you're driving, you shouldn't be typing, like you shouldn't be doing messaging, but when you're driving, audio works really well. So there are some use cases, or when you're cooking or something, you've got your hands busy or your hands dirty and you want to use, so there are certain examples of moments or sort of user journeys which will lead you down one versus the other. And I think Lizzie made a good point. I think hybrids are the right answer. It might be, I want to ask my bank about my balance, and my balance is not what I thought it was, and that's not good news. And now I want to drill in and I want to see a statement of one of my transactions. Maybe I want to come out of audio and now I want to move into the messaging and send me some things that I can visually look at and sort of ponder for the next hour or something. So it's, I don't think there are many good examples of that yet. We definitely see that sort of hybrid mode being important for those really kind of good one-to-one relationships.
And now I would like to talk a little bit more about development workflow. And so just looking at how developers usually build AI systems, for example, with Rasa or other tools, I have noticed that obviously it's this multi-step process. You start with just coming up with the idea of your assistant, and then all the development work follows. But also you have to make so many decisions along the way, from just like what kind of things you want your assistant to do, to what kind of software stack to use to develop your assistant, and so on. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about where in the development workflow do you see the decision of which platform your assistant should be deployed on should be. Like, should it be made at the very beginning of the development, or is it something that you see developers deciding on at the very end, by the time they pretty much are deploying the assistant in production? So maybe Lizzie, you have some insight on that.
Yes, I think you should have an idea before you start building, and maybe in the beginning when you start building like a proof of concept or an MVP. But honestly, I think you can test a bot on multiple platforms. Like if I'm testing, I just want what's fastest. And I think picking what you're deploying to for your final product is when it really matters. And you should also test and see what your users want, who you want to reach, when will they be using your assistant, where will they be using it. I wanted to chime in for the last question kind of, but this is also related, how like voice is more accessible to many. I was at a voice conference a few months ago before all this, and there were a lot of talks on, I guess, using voice apps to reach people who cannot maybe see or type. So that is something to consider, that I like for voice, as reaching more people who cannot otherwise user assistant.
Mm-hmm. Rob, maybe you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got anything very intelligent to say. Like, I mean, I think as we're sort of a channel, so often we see we're engaging with brands because they made a decision to use the channel. But again, I think success comes down from sort of thinking about those, like, who's your user, what are the use cases, and then evaluating that omni-channel world. Like, you know, if you're in Brazil, WhatsApp probably makes sense, and if you're in the US, WhatsApp doesn't make sense. And if you're driving versus at home, like, you know, I think you have to think through those things and then think through which channels are going to have the most impact. And then, you know, so I think it's better done before you start building rather than, okay, now we build something, let's look for a deployment channel. I think that's less likely to be successful, but yeah.
And a little bit more about this development process. So we can see that obviously there are multiple stages when deploying any kind of assistant. You have 0 to POC, then from POC to production, and then other stages after that, like adding more scope, scalability, and so on. Does the channel deployment strategy differ at each of these stages? For example, do you see some, I don't know, specific channels, front-end options that make more sense for POC stage and some others for other stages? What's your opinion on that? Maybe Rob, you can take this one first.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm a big believer in sort of small steps rather than sort of big sort of steps. So the more you can build a sort of MVP, POC example and get that in front of a few users and understand how that's working and then iterate from there rather than trying to build the whole thing and then deploy it into a channel and find that it doesn't work. I think we see that being more successful. So for example, let's say you're a retailer, you want to launch something messaging, you can put that on one store, you can put that on 10 stores or 100 stores. You can choose some slice of the world to test that with, and it doesn't have to have all of the intents and all of the features you want to build, but think about what the first 2 or 3 are that you think are most important. Let's get that in front of some consumers and let's look and see how are they using that, what are the fallback intents, what questions are they asking that you haven't built, and then build against those and expand without having to put that, you know, at a full sort of global launch. So from a Google perspective, we try and sort of give you ways of impacting either a percentage of users or a percentage of geography or number of stores or different ways that we can do that. So I think, you know, find something that you think is really viable, like so that is, you know, it actually will solve some user needs, but then let's get that in front of people and kind of quickly iterate rather than so that doesn't really answer your question, but I think that sort of mindset of doing something that's small and then getting real sort of user throughput on that you can kind of train using the fallback intents, you know, we see working well. And conversely, the people that kind of come with the intents, sort of menu, sort of AI experience and deploy, often some of those things just don't get used and you know, I think the other thing we try and do is look at some of the softer feedback loops. So use CSAT surveys, use sort of qualitative, you know, what did you like, what didn't you like early in the process to get a sense of not just, well, what are people doing and how does, you know, what else do we build, but like, how does that make people feel and are they getting value from it? I think that's good signal to try and push back. So we try and we measure CSAT, we sort of feed that back to businesses so they can use that to sort of try and iterate quickly.
I agree with Rob on, I guess, the importance of user testing at different stages and taking that feedback as you go. I think I've been building with fully autopilot for too long that I haven't really remembered or considered that development process, because with autopilot, you deploy your bot last and you can deploy across different channels. So I haven't thought about, I guess, editing how I build an assistant based on the channel. I guess to me, what's important is the functionality and less about the channel. So I think it still holds that, in my opinion, that you should focus on the bot functionality first, and you can still test your bot assistant, like via SMS is often easy. Like you just go on your phone, test it out. And then once that works, you can later on iterate and test it on the channel that you want to deploy it on. Like if it works for one, at least in my experience building with Autopilot, then it'll work for another. And that's the, I guess, the focus. That's what you want.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about like making this choice, like which channels to even try out and test your assistant on, like, do you see anything like some kind of best practices of how developers or companies do that when they try to figure out what would be, this channel that would help them to approach their user best? So like, what kind of advice would you give someone who is now building an assistant and thinking like, okay, which channel should I consider? So is it just about, trying and seeing what works, or maybe you see some kind of more specific workflows or things that developers do to actually figure out like what could be the channel that would be the best for the user? Maybe Lizzie, you would like to start with this one first.
Yeah, I think you could do like, I think it's called like a gunshot approach, where you just like try them all and see where your users are and where they're using it the most. But I think what would be slightly easier would be to consider where they are. Like if most of your users are on Facebook, try Messenger maybe. Or SMS, I think is pretty like easy to try out. They can do it asynchronously. Everyone has a phone. And I think, again, going back to hybrids, I think that will be much more common in the future. And I think that will be preferred by users. And I think you should also consider, I guess, different countries and different demographics. Like what demographic do you want to reach? I think, again, with generations, I would prefer SMS. I think my mom would prefer voice.
Mm-hmm. Rob, maybe you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything Lizzie said. Like, I think it's really, it's what we've said. Like, it's understand who your user is, try and meet them where they are, rather than sort of force them into a channel that's better for you. I think about use cases and user journeys and visual versus audio. Different panel. Even okay, you want to do messaging. Well, there are different features in WhatsApp versus Messenger versus SMS. Like there are things that you might want to look at from the sort of richness of the channel. Do you need payments? Do you need authentication? Do you need to show a picture of the genes? Do you like, those things will impact choice. I think try and model it back from reach. I mean, you want to like how many users am I going to impact if I choose this channel versus another channel? So it's there's trade on features in certain markets. Not as much because they've switched to other over-the-top channels, but you've got high reach, but you've got low levels of richness. Like if you want to do payments and photos and videos and things, SMS isn't the right channel. So it's you sort of try and look at that sort of matrix of features versus reach, and look at where you think will have the most impact and make decisions that way.
Mm-hmm. Great. Actually, my last question to wrap up this discussion, I would like to get your opinions about the future because, just like AI field overall, I think the way we communicate is also evolving. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about how you think the communication between AI assistants and users will evolve, and how those communication channels will look like in the future. So maybe Rob, you would like to start, yeah.
Yeah, fun question. I think, this isn't really very sort of visionary. This is really sort of copying other teams at Google. But I'm really interested in the idea of AI and bots working for me, the consumer, rather than working for the business. Like, you tend to think about, okay, you're going to build it from the brand perspective, and the consumer's going to come and engage with my AI. Google has a product called Duplex, which is really a voice call product. Like if you want to book a table at a restaurant that doesn't use a sort of booking system, you basically just go to a Google interface and you say, okay, I want a table for two. And again, this is, imagine that restaurants are open and we can go and have dinner, but like you want a table for two at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, and the voice agent then calls the business. It's a voice bot that calls the business, understands natural language, and books a table for Rob at 8 o'clock. And if they're successful, they come back and say, great, you've got a confirmation. And so there's an AI bot working for me, Rob, like out in the world doing my business. Like, so I love that concept. Like, okay, I want to check my bank balance. Like, let's get the bot to go and deal with the bank. And so, like, you know, I don't want to spend my time doing that. Like, I could have an agent work on my behalf to go and do those things. So I love the idea of AI being deployed as a consumer tool. The business has to cope with inbound bots coming from consumers rather than the other way around. So which leads you to sort of a future state where, you know, the business has got a bot dealing with the Rob bot that sort of, you know, sorts out my bank balance or whatever it is. But I think those things are really interesting. It sort of reframes bots as being kind of really friendly to consumers rather than being something that's sort of business focused.
I think kind of related to that, one bot that I've been very interested in is an Alexa bot by the NFL. And I think this makes sense as a platform or a channel for the NFL. Like, someone's at home on their couch watching TV. I don't watch football, too violent, but I understand. And they turn on their Alexa, and the Alexa app by the NFL has voices of players and trivia about the players. It's very personable and humanizing. And it kind of makes users forget that it's a bot. They're like, oh, it's this player that I like. And they talk about like their favorite ice cream or their dog. I think when building bots, it's important to remember to humanize it and like to connect people. And that's where we see reaching people, users where they are. And I really like this use case. It's like good engagement from a business standpoint. Like, it's very popular. I forget the number of people using it, but it's fun. Like, I don't think you could necessarily pinpoint how much money it's made. Like, it's very much like trivia. Like, it's fun, but it's something that I think people forget that bots can be fun just for fun. And this reaches a demographic that I think might not otherwise like or use bots. That kind of goes against, we at Folio, we talk about chatbot best practices, one of which is like, you should always let the user know that it's a bot ahead of time. And then after that, you outline what your bot can do. So like, you set expectations and you set standards. And with the NFL bot, that kind of like goes against that a little, because sometimes people might be like, that's not a bot, it's like the actual football player. I don't know. But I think in some cases, you can go against that best practice in this case.
Yeah, no, I can definitely agree that future looks exciting, interesting, and overall, what I find the most exciting about this like entire conversational AI field is just how quickly it moves, and we constantly see new things being added to just overall tech, machine learning behind it, and yeah, I'm just really excited to see how AI assistants will evolve in the future, and I'm sure we will see more and more of them in our daily lives. Things that that we need to be done, like banking assistants, to those fun assistants, like Lizzie mentioned. So thank you so much for a really interesting conversation, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your ideas with us today. And I'm for everyone who were listening, I hope you enjoyed the panel, and that you will have really great the rest of the conference.